Welcome to our series on how the Bible was built. In this video, we're going to look at how the Old Testament became Scripture, Part 2. And as always, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it. The Samaritans were a group of people who lived in Samaria, a region north of Jerusalem. They were half Jews and half Gentiles. When Assyria captured the northern kingdom of Israel in 721 BC, some were taken into captivity, while others were left behind. The ones left behind intermarried with the Assyrians. Thus, these people were never fully Hebrews nor fully Gentiles. This sect only recognized the Torah as scripture because at this point in Jewish history, the 5 books were the only ones accepted as holy scripture. At the time of Jesus, the Jews and the Samaritans did not deal with one another. Jesus, however, ministered to the people of Samaria, preaching the good news to them. For example, you can look at the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, verse 25, and the woman at the well in John chapter 4. Another Jewish group was the Sadducees. They also recognized the Torah as holy scripture. The Sadducees were the royal priests of the religion of Israel. They were the keepers and officials of the temple in Jerusalem. There weren't very many of them, but because of their high position in Jewish life, they were influential. The vast majority of the Jewish people, however, came to look on the law as the foundation of their scripture. We can think of the rest of the Old Testament as the roof and the walls constructed on this foundation. The Pharisees had emerged as a party of laymen and scribes, in contrast to the Sadducees, who were the party of the priesthood who had traditionally provided the sole leadership of Jewish people. The basic difference that led to the split between the Pharisees and the Sadducees lay in their respective attitudes towards the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. The Pharisees believed that the law that God gave to Moses was twofold, consisting of the written law and the teaching of the prophets. The priestly Sadducees taught that the written Torah was the only source of revelation. In Acts chapter 23, verses 6 through 8, Luke writes this: Then Paul, knowing that some of them were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, called out in the Sanhedrin, "My brothers, I am a Pharisee, descended from Pharisees. I stand on trial because of the hope of the resurrection of the dead." When he said this, a dispute broke out between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. The Sadducees say that there is no resurrection, and that there are neither angels nor spirits, but the Pharisees believe all these things. Let's look at the prophets and the writings of the Old Testament. The prophets make the walls of the house. We can consider the prophets as the walls of the Old Testament. The letter of Amos was the first among a group of writers whose books comprise this section of the Bible that we call the prophets. Amos did his writing in the 8th century, probably around 750 BC. Hosea, Micah, and Isaiah all wrote about this same time. Here are some of the themes. Amos said that God expects his believers and everyone in every nation to live righteous lives and to show mercy. This marked a great step forward in religious thought. We call Amos's idea of God ethical monotheism, meaning he believed that there was only one God who demands certain kinds of behavior from all people. The prophet Hosea wrote his book not long after Amos. Hosea stressed the redemptive love of God. Isaiah was also written around the time of Amos and Hosea. In Isaiah's book, we find beautiful descriptions of the ideal king who will bring in a new age of justice and righteousness. Chapters 40 through 55 of the book of Isaiah communicate how God shapes human history. Also in these chapters, we find the awe-inspiring poetry about what scholars call the suffering servant, which was a prophecy of the coming Messiah, Jesus. So on the foundation of the law, the Torah, the Jews erected the walls of the house of the Bible and called them the prophets. The minor prophets. Jews would call these the latter prophets. These 12 books, the minor prophets, are called minor not because they are of lesser importance than other books, but because the books are short. In fact, the Jews thought of this collection of writings as one book. The foundation of our house was laid in the 7th century BC, when the book of Deuteronomy was discovered. It took approximately 200 years for the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers to be accepted as scripture by the Jews. And even though they had been reading the letters of the prophets for a long time, recognizing their religious value, it took nearly 200 years more before the Jews thought of the prophets as scripture. Sometime around 200 BC, the Jews accepted what we call the books of history and the prophets as scripture and should be included with the Torah. So in a period of roughly 400 years, the Jews had put in the foundation of the Old Testament, and therefore the foundation of the Bible, and had its walls in place. The writings, the roof of the Old Testament. From the prophets, we move into the writings, the roof of the Old Testament. One of the pieces of writings in Jewish history is the Psalms. The Psalms were very important to the religious life of the Jews. They were their hymns as well as their prayers. We suppose they were used in their public worship and as aids to their private devotions. The Psalms are a different kind of literature. They are a collection of writings that do not fit into the law nor with the prophets. This group of writings is a mixed bag of writings. Job is a philosophical essay. Song of Songs is a poem about love. Lamentations is, well, a lamentation. It expresses grief. Chronicles is a history of Jerusalem. And Daniel is a story about young heroes of the Jewish faith. This section of the Old Testament also includes the books of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, which contain various teachings about life and the human condition, as well as the stories of Ruth, Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah. The Jews referred to this diverse group as the writings. Former prophets and latter prophets. The list of former prophets includes Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Samuel and Kings we call history. The list of latter prophets includes Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, plus 12 shorter prophetic books: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. We call them minor prophets because they are shorter. Christians generally classify these books as law, history, poetry, major prophets, and minor prophets. In the next video, we'll take a look at how the Apocrypha came to be and what it is. And as always, if you like this material, be sure to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it.